Well, hi, welcome to today's webinar. It's part of the KaiNexus Continuous Improvement webinar series. I am Mark Graban, your host and moderator today. I'm a senior advisor with KaiNexus. I'm very excited about our topic today. The title is Creating Leader Standard Work Across a Distributed Business Model, and we're joined by our presenter, Brent Loescher. Okay, next. If this is your first time attending one of our webinars, I want to say welcome. You're welcome even if you're a regular attendee. But for those who are new, KaiNexus is an enterprise platform that's designed to drive continuous improvement and transformation across organizations. If you'd like to learn more about KaiNexus, please visit our website, or you can scan the QR code. Visit our website at www.kainexus.com. And then one last quick announcement before introducing Brent. For KaiNexus customers, we encourage you to register for KaiNexicon 2025. It's our 9th annual KaiNexus user conference. You can get early bird pricing today or through the end of the month at kainexus.com/KaiNexicon. So we hope to see you there. So let me introduce our webinar presenter today. Again, he is Brent Loescher. Brent has spent more than 20 years working in and on the businesses he's been a part of, improving operations within high-speed manufacturing, warehousing, distribution, distributed services environments, and governmental agencies. He's a lean practitioner at heart, and he received his formal Toyota Production System, or TPS, training while working for Toyota Motor Sales in their North American parts operations. So while at Toyota, Brent was responsible for the operational design of 2 new warehouses built in Puerto Rico and Mexico City. He's a certified TPS trainer. He developed strategic warehouse design standards while also serving as the Toyota Customer Service Diversity and Inclusion Champion Coordinator. Brent helped develop a lean program for the landscape maintenance industry, implementing and evolving continuous improvement programs across the country since 2009. And this included co-leading a team that focused on the operational integration of a $2 billion merger. Brent is currently responsible for learning and development and CI for a startup landscape maintenance and construction company that does work in 14 states. He has a BA in business management from Mercyhurst University, and he's also a retired military veteran, having served 21 years in the U.S. Army and the U.S. Army Reserve. And Brent also points out that he's a girl dad, and along with his wife, Kim, is anxiously awaiting the birth of their second grandchild. Are you still in anxiously awaiting mode, Brent?
John, I think we're in the last probably 10 days, hopefully.
Oh, okay. If you needed to cancel today because of breaking news developments there, we would have understood. So congratulations to you and your family in advance. And the most controversial thing, he is a Green Bay Packers fan. So I know we have somebody from Sauk Prairie, Wisconsin join. So you've got at least one other Packers fan with you here, Brent. But with that, we got a smile, and we've also got a Steelers fan identifying themselves in the chat. So with that, Brent, thank you again for doing the session. I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mark. Very, very excited for the opportunity to chat with everyone today. And to be totally frank, a little bit anxious as well. Anxious in a good way. But even my wife was giving me a hard time earlier today about the deep breathing and maybe the sighing I was doing as I was enjoying coffee, thinking about this conversation, thinking about the opportunity to share a little bit of our experience in the last year or so. Perhaps this title of this conversation should really be how we've started, how we are going so far, because we are very, very early into our agenda on leader standard work and those efforts within our organization. But for today, as I was thinking about it, I thought I'd start with a little bit of just a background to ground us where I'm coming from, where and how I think about leader standard work, the basics of leader standard work. Give you a little bit of an overview, because I'm not sure everybody recognizes that landscape maintenance is actually a job and in a big industry out there, but it give you a little bit of how we're set up, particularly what kind of leaders do we have in the business, so you get a sense of who we're working with. And then I'll tell you a little bit about how our approaches have gone this first year and some lessons we've learned along the way, because we certainly have learned a bunch. We've made some mistakes, and I think that'll be the rich part of the conversation. So let me give you just a little bit of background about myself. Like any of us, I have been shaped over the years by the training that I've received or even the training I've delivered. I've been shaped by the practice of trying to put leader standard work in place for myself, and helping others do the same. And I've certainly been shaped by the different experiences that I've had wherever I've had the opportunity to work, whether it was that high-speed manufacturing line and being asked to leave the logistics role that I was in to go out and figure out why are we having so much variability in the production line itself. This is a line that wants to run 24 hours a day. And one of the early things I realized were that as soon as a shift change happened, the second shift leader liked to run the machine a different way and was automatically, even if the machine was running great, was making adjustments to the machine and instructing his team to make adjustments to the machine. My time in the military, I was in the logistics side of the military, and it didn't take long for me to recognize that if we were doing, I don't know, issuing supplies or having an inventory of some sorts, there would always be groups or platoons of soldiers who are ready to go, organized. We got through the effort efficiently. And then the next platoon that we work with were scatterbrained. We weren't efficient at all. It became easy to predict who was going to lose their equipment or break their equipment. And I started to understand there's something going on here with the way leaders interact with their teams that prove out the effectiveness of them and their teams. I've certainly been shaped by my time and experience at Toyota, where, as you said, Mark, I got really my lean Toyota production principles chops honed dramatically, all culminating probably one of my more favorite projects, which was opening up the Toyota Parts Center in Puerto Rico. But also at Toyota, recognizing the value of managing the daily work. And in a distribution environment that's managing not just that the warehouse opens and closes that day and then we get our shipments out, but it was uniquely managing how was receiving going, how was picking of large parts going, how was the effort of unloading or loading trucks going, and all of that, seeing that broken down, learning how to manage that daily, and also recognizing that those leaders closest to the work were much more engaged and systematic in which they were managing that work and managing the crews there. That gave me sort of some insight there. When I got to landscaping in 2008, I was practicing putting lean behaviors into a field that I had no experience in, and certainly still feel that I'm a student of, but being able to teach others how to be a good observer, how to step back from the work, watch the work happen, and the things that can be learned when you do watch it happen. All of those types of things have sort of shaped the way I've started thinking about the work, and really how I started to think about as leaders also, because as I experienced the different leaders we had, and that company, Valley Crest, at that point in time, we had 125 branches around the country. Getting to work with each of the individual leaders was fascinating to see, one, how they led their teams, but also if they implemented a new practice, how it positively affected them and their teams. And then really, just like honing my TPS chops with Toyota, I honed my views on leader standard work when I got a chance to meet Karen Martin. And Karen, we saw you jump on the call. Thanks for joining us today. And it was Karen and I co-writing the leader standard work basic class that is on TKMG Academy, a place where Karen has amassed a great collection of operational improvement topics, one, Mark, that you have done as well. And Karen and I spent a lot of time writing this lesson as we reflected a little bit, realizing maybe we've spent more time writing this lesson than some of the other ones that she has on our site, and particularly because there had not been a lot codified around the idea of leader standard work in the past. Karen had come across some writing by David Mann, who in 2006 published his great book, Creating a Lean Culture. And there he mentioned the idea of bringing standards into leadership practices, but there wasn't a lot of information on the how-to. And so my shaping of the way I think about it, and this has been now maybe almost 5 years since Karen and I had these conversations, has continued to be refined around what Karen and I came up with when we put the Leader Standard Work class together. So that's a little bit about the background. Why don't we talk a little bit about the basics as we carved it out for the TKMG Academy class. You know, when Karen and I started, we immediately jumped into the what should leaders do? And there was a point, and I don't remember exactly when it was in the conversation, though, that we said, okay, we have a sense of what maybe they should do, but we haven't quite answered the question, why should they do it? What is it about the activities, and why should they perform these activities on a more standardized or non-discretionary basis? And that got us thinking about, well, what are the responsibilities of leaders? Because if I understood and had some insight into the responsibilities of leaders, that would start to create the why for the activities. And we came up with 6 key responsibilities. And the more I've thought about it and worked with these, I have really come to strongly embrace these responsibilities of any leader, and I've pressure tested it at a lot of different levels with leaders that I've interacted with. So these 6 key responsibilities, one, and maybe almost foremost, leaders have the responsibility to uphold the purpose, mission, and values, and the goals and the targets of the organization that they're leading. If not them, who, right? Leaders have a need to manage, process, and manage the performance of their business. They need, in our case, we're going to talk a little bit about this, they need to run the profit and loss, the P&L of the business, the financial performance of the business, but not just that, of course, but they need to manage the processes that get them there, that make the team successful. Leaders need to build and foster a culture of excellence. How do we, as an organization, become a thinking or a learning organization that is building upon always finding ways to be better at the work that we do? They need to develop their people. All too often we have leaders who just hold on to all the knowledge, believing that they are the ones that need to make the decisions, do the work, and forget about the development of their own people, and by elevating them, what that's going to mean for them and the organization. They need to build and manage relationships. That's both internal relationships and external relationships, whether it's relationships with their team or customers or stakeholders that they work with. And leaders need to learn continuously. And perhaps now I'll throw out a big thank you for all those watching this webinar. You have embraced this activity, this key responsibility of yours, by just joining us and spending a little bit of time talking about Leader Stand and Work. So thank you for that. So with those responsibilities, those whys in mind, it was Karen and I that came up with the 7 key activities that ultimately show up in this course that we used. First, leaders need to plan and prepare. Leaders need to plan and prepare. And in my landscaping business, and perhaps it's not the only business out there, I have found a wide range of leaders who tend to like the firefight, tend to get involved in just reacting to the day or the instant that presents him. What's interesting in our environment is not only do we do landscaping in the summertime, but in winter markets we may do snow plowing. And I found leaders in the markets where they do snow plowing look at snow plowing as a serious event, and they would have boards on the wall and charts and graphs of who was going to be doing what, where the equipment was going to be going, because as you know, you get maybe a couple days notice that snow is going to happen. Yet when it got to the summertime and they're doing landscape maintenance, the work that we do week in and week out over the course of the summer, there was less planning and preparing, and it sort of baffled me. Planning and preparing is a key activity that leaders need to spend time and invest time in doing to be successful. They need to actively manage the daily work. What's the expectation for the day, and how do we get through that? And where do we need to course correct along the way? Leaders need to go see one of our fundamental lean behaviors, right? Get to the Gemba, go see the work, see the opportunities that exist. They need to coach for professional development. That is coaching the people that you have in your purview to be better at what they do, to help them achieve the career goals and aspirations that they have. That's different than how we've talked about here, coaching for problem solving, which is a skill set so necessary in any business of how do I solve problems. We tend to have folks who are really good at elevating problems. We need to coach teams to be able to solve for those problems. and not just rely on the leader to help solve the problem. Again, from an activity standpoint, leaders need to spend time developing and managing relationships, both with their people, with their leaders within the organization, their stakeholders within that may be part of their organization in one way or another, and certainly the external customers if they have that facing responsibility. And lastly, leaders need to spend time reflecting. I heard a quote that I enjoyed one time that said, "We don't learn from the experience, we learn by reflecting on the experience." And I've loved that quote and have sort of embraced that myself. I certainly don't practice it as much as I probably should. It's one of the things I need to work on, but leaders need to do that and spend time doing that. Now, in the class for TKMG, we talked about, all right, if these are the activities that leaders should be doing, how often should they be doing them? What is the frequency they should be spending on discretionary versus non-discretionary time, as we called out? Discretionary meaning that's not the standardized time. That is leaving time within your schedules to react to conditions that occur today or during the week that were unplanned for. Non-discretionary, perhaps maybe you can use the word standardized, those standard activities, these 7 standard activities, is the time that I should be putting in my schedule to make sure I do these. And in the class, we talk about really leaders at different levels will have different percentages of time that are standardized versus non-standardized. Ultimately, those closest to the work. Those closest to the work should be most standardized in their day, or most non-discretionary time should be utilized in their day. Meaning, if I'm a direct supervisor over the work that's happening in front of me, then perhaps maybe up to 75 to 80% of my time should be spent on these 7 key activities in a very structured, methodical way. When I'm the next layer up from that, perhaps my time is more 50-50 split, where I'm leaving more time to react to other things that are going on in the business. Maybe I'm reacting to different areas or groups that I'm managing or have responsibility for. And if I'm hitting a more sort of executive level of the business, whatever size of business we're talking about, then certainly I have less time that can be standardized because I have more things to react to. I have external stakeholders I may be reacting to, maybe a board as an example, or maybe I'm dealing with some of the customer issues that are facing us. But I still need to be an effective leader, to be better for myself, to be better for my people, and ultimately be better for the business. I do need to dedicate and commit some time to these 7 key activities. That gives you a little bit of background on how I think about leader standard work. Let me pause for just a second and talk to you a little bit about Sperber and our organization. Like I said, until I got into landscaping in 2008, I had no idea the size of a business it was. For example, the biggest business in the company, or I'm sorry, the biggest company in the nation, a company called Brightview, has 2.5 million or so, or 2.5 billion in revenue. And they only have 4 to 5% of the market share. It is a massive, massive market. Sperber is glad to be and happy to be a part of that. We create and maintain beautiful landscapes all over the country. We are less than 6 years old. We're just, still in a startup mode. Heck, when I first joined the company 3 years ago, we didn't have anybody doing procurement, so I stepped in and did procurement for a while. It's just the nature of the way those startups happen, as many of you may know. But already in these 5 years, we are within the top 10 largest landscape companies in the United States. We've grown fast. We operate primary businesses in 11 states with work that is occurring across 14 states or the District of Columbia. We have across those states what I'll call branches, and those are 30 plus branches, each of them having their own P&L and each of them having a P&L owner that runs the business. 16 of the 17 landscape businesses that we have across the company are through acquisition. And so what that gives us is an organization that is made up of 15 or 16 widely varying cultures and operational practices, even though we're all doing landscape maintenance work, but some of these businesses had been family run for 30, 40, 50 years already and had their own cultures that they brought to the table. Part of that is why we brought them into the table. We wanted them part of the Sperber family because of the culture that they have, because of the name that they have in their own marketplace. But as positive as those cultures are, that's also a little bit of the challenge that you have when you try to implement things, and particularly as you start to dive in around leader standard work. From a structure standpoint, maybe helpful to understand how those branches are set up and the different leaders that we're talking about. Within a P&L itself, one of those branches, we have what we call a branch manager. We talk to them as they are, look, you are the P&L owner of this business. It's your business to run. We're here to help you do that. Within that branch, they're going to have a sales leader, somebody who is actively looking for, searching, finding new maintenance work. They have administrative leaders running the administrative side of the business to help out with everything from AP to AR to payroll, all those normal types of things. We have client-facing leaders. That is the account manager who is responsible for an ongoing maintenance account and the person in direct contact with the client or multiple clients that they, for those accounts that they oversee. We have production-facing leaders in many cases. Sometimes the account manager is one and the same. They're both client-facing and production-facing. But in some businesses, we have a strictly production-facing leader who is overseeing multiple field teams or multiple crews. And then we have those leaders of those field teams or those crews. So we have a variety of leaders in our business. And as I've talked about, I firmly believe that each one of these leaders has key activities they should be doing to meet their daily responsibilities of their role. For our focus at the Sperber level, I'll say that our primary focus over the first year, and really 2024, has been with the branch managers, the P&L owners, and those client-facing leaders. We are expanding that as time goes along. We have interacted and engaged with every one of these leaders, but our primary LSW work has been with the branch managers and those client-facing leaders. So what's been the approach? The approach really has been driven, and I'm happy to say that I have this kind of leadership in our organization, but our CEO also has a military background. Jeff is a Navy veteran, and a Navy veteran of running on nuclear missile submarines, nuclear submarines. And he has consistently, in all of our trainings and all of our engagements with our leaders across the country, been focused on what he calls consistent leadership practices. Read that, leader standard work. Consistent leadership practices. From his experience in the Navy, he goes, look, there's one way to turn on that nuclear reactor within that submarine, and everybody in those submarines is taught the exact same way. You consistently do it to ensure the safety and functionality of that reactor that's powering that submarine. And so having that focus has been really, really helpful in beginning to implement some leader standard work across our organization. But we didn't jump in on all activities. We really said, you know what, there's a couple responsibilities that we need to focus on first. We need to focus on our culture, and what is the culture of this company, Sperber? How do we honor the culture of those businesses out there in the States, very distributed, but also how do we embrace one culture as a family? And how do we manage process and performance, and what do we mean by that? When it comes to activities, we have spent time working on how I manage the daily work. What are the key things that drive the business? For us, it's labor. On the maintenance side of landscape maintenance, 50% of our cost on average is labor to do the work. So we need to think about how we're managing the daily work to achieve what our clients are contracting us to do. We have spent time going and seeing and learning how to see. It's a skill set, as you all know. And then we've also talked about developing and managing relationships a fair amount, and specifically on that client-facing side, because one thing I never knew getting into landscaping, I thought, hey, it's mowing grass, it's pruning shrubs, but I never fully appreciated how much of a relationship business this is. This is landscaping. We're obviously dealing with living, breathing things, and I'm not talking about our people. I'm talking about the plants, the grass, the trees, the shrubs. It brings about a ton of variables. We're talking about we deal with Mother Nature, and two of our businesses in Florida already having to have dealt with 2 hurricanes this year and the outcomes of those and what that means to landscape maintenance on their properties, let alone mean what it meant for their own branch, their people, and the safety of them along the way. So, we spent a lot of time on culture, and one of the very first things, and we've been doing this really since we started in the first year, is we've been focused on safety. Safety first. It is the most important thing that we can do for our team in the field to ensure that they're going home with the same fingers and toes that they came with this morning. And super proud to say that effort has really paid dividends, and you can see our year-over-year reduction in total recordable incidents that we've had across all of our businesses. We are in the summertime in the neighborhood of almost 4,000 employees doing work every day. And safety for us starts the first thing in the morning, and it starts by being leader-led. That we are on time, that we are in the proper protective equipment, like as you can see in the pictures, safety vest, earplugs, glasses, we have access to gloves, and that we do a stretch and flex. Now, each of the leaders have adopted their own sort of cultures of how they do the stretch and flex. Some are bringing speakers out and playing music and having a lot of fun with it. But all of the leaders are there in front of their teams. They're dressed just like they expect their team to be. And they're engaging with their team to remind them that safety is the most important thing that they'll do every day. And we've had a lot of success in shifting that culture across all of these businesses. We had a need, those are kind of blurry, we had a need to really focus on roles and responsibilities. 16, 17 businesses across the country, 30 plus branches, all doing landscape maintenance work. Yet when we peeled back the onion a little bit, we had over 220 titles being used at that branch level. Really, really hard to develop any kind of programs around training and development and learning when you have so many titles and different approaches to it. So we've spent time this year focused on how do we align on those client-facing roles and the responsibilities of those client-facing roles versus what are the roles of the production-facing folks or the business development staff or the administrative staff. And we spent a ton of time talking about that through Zoom sessions and in-person training sessions where we've brought people from around the country together. And I can tell you, we've really shifted the needle on that. In a recent meeting that we had in Dallas just last month, the amount of conversation that we were having across the board was vastly different than it had been a year ago because we were using common language finally. We've also sort of worked hard on that common language piece and playbooks, if you will, for how we execute the work every day. And making dramatic increases in that. I mentioned the other responsibility that we focused on, and that is process management and performance management. For us, that really started with P&L training because many of the leaders running the business, frankly, hadn't been exposed to, or the P&L was kept at a higher level than we wanted to keep it. We come from the perspective that every one of our leaders should understand the basics of a profit and loss statement, how budgets are created, and how we manage the overall outcomes of the business from a growth perspective and a performance perspective. But we couldn't do that if we didn't speak the same language and they didn't know that. And for reasons not too surprisingly, family-run businesses may not have shared those details of the profit and loss with their team members the way we are doing it now. But like I said, we've executed on that and spent a lot of time training on that via Zooms and in-person sessions with our team. We have ensured that our branch leaders know that we think of them as the P&L owners, the branch owners, and that they should be thinking and making decisions in that vein. And we have started working on, and we did this early last year with the weekly reporting that would be fed from the corporate level of some of the most important key indicators for us to be looking at every week. And with our operating system, we have started to introduce dashboards that allow every branch manager to see the same dashboard that is showing the performance of their individual team, their individual P&L along the way. We have a lot of work to do in this still, by the way. 2025 is already seeing us working on a clearer matrix of expectation when it comes to the daily management of work, the weekly management of work, the monthly management of the P&L. But I mentioned a couple of the activities, and here are some. We did engage McKinsey to help us a couple years ago and do some studies, and after those studies, we went out and spent 8 to 10 weeks at individual businesses to really get our boots on the ground and spend as much time as we could with the teams to begin exploring things, leader standard work that we believed would help our businesses improve the way they work. And when it comes to actively managing work, it started with our morning and end of day practices. And in the morning, this idea of huddles was introduced. And I'm happy to say that it was piloted in 2 locations, but it's already been adopted by 3. The 2 that we worked with, certainly as any change happens, it took some time for it to become a normal habit. And to see the power of having that morning huddle to collect the people involved. But we framed out a levels of cascading huddles that you can see here, where a level 1 huddle, and it's the middle picture there, is my production facing leader meeting with his 4 or 5 crew leaders and talking about the day. Do they have what they need? Do they know where they're going? Do they know how much time they're supposed to be there? And do they have the people, tools, and equipment to get the work done? And then moving to a level 2 huddle, which you see in the right-hand column, which is now all of the production-facing leaders, as well as client-facing leaders and the branch manager talking about the day. The crew is now out. They've already begun work. Now the leaders are having a huddle to talk about the day. We haven't quite got to the level 3. There are some businesses that I think would still benefit from that. But super excited that that caught traction and is a good practice in a couple of our businesses. The third business that picked it up naturally was a gentleman who had left one of the first 2 pilot locations, moved to the other business and said, guys, girls, we are much better off if we do this huddle thing I learned at the last place I was, and started on their own. We're going to see further rollout of huddles across the board going into next year. Go and see. We practice it a lot, and I'm again happy with the leadership that we have at the business. Our president of the maintenance business models this every time he's out in the field. He's in Florida today as I speak, out in the field with our crews. Now, we do have the benefit that our Gemba here in landscape maintenance literally is the field. It's the front yard, it's the park, it's the entryway to a resort where our crews are doing work. But we have been, through various means, whether it be in-person sessions or through those pilot locations, getting leaders out and teaching them the benefits of doing observation and what you see and learn there and what can happen when you go and see. We have focuses that we give them that I think helps them in their observation. First is, I want you to be looking for safety things. Again, the most important thing that we do for our teams. I want you to be looking for quality because that's what our customers expect. And then I want you to be looking for forms of waste, maybe things that at least scratch your head and go, why are we doing it, or why are we doing it that way? And with those things, see the opportunities that we have to improve and indeed improve work. We've been doing observations in yards, in our trucks and trailers, and our job sites. I've even attended a couple of staff meetings, and in our staff meeting, they're sitting around a conference room table, and one team I caught off guard, they were having a conversation of how they thought they needed to improve how they were storing fertilizers and chemicals. And I got about 2 minutes into that conversation, I said, can we pause? Can we go to the Gemba where you're storing the fertilizers and chemicals? Let's get up out of our chairs. Let's have the conversation right where it is. It's going to make it more lively. And doing things like that has really helped the team realize the power of go and see. And lastly, developing and managing relationships. We've spent a lot of time there, particularly in the client-facing side. It is such a relationship business and important to us. We've been sketching out with our client-facing leaders, hey, here's some time blocking of a typical day for you. We'd like you at the start of day and the end of day practices. And we know that you have some desk time that you need to do a proposal or answer some emails, but then you've got to block out time to be out there and see your clients. And see your clients on their job sites. Go and look at the office building and the landscape. And we've talked to our teams about effective site visits done really well actually help increase the capabilities and embrace some of the key activities that all of our leaders should be doing anyway. So in a 4-step process, if you go to the job site, see the operation, see the crew, engage them, develop that relationship, check in on the daily performance, look at the job, look at the quality of the job, connect with your client, engage them, let them know that you're on their site and taking care of the landscape that they contracted for that. Working with our teams on effective site visits is another way that we've really started focusing in on the relationship development and that activity for leaders. That's been a fast year for us. And as I mentioned at the onset, we have learned a lot. We've made some mistakes along the way for sure. But there's some key things that I've learned, that our team has learned as we've tried to do this. Some of this probably is no-brainers to most of us. The first one here, the leader is truly the culture creator. And we have to embrace that leader and make them understand the changes that they are trying to promote. Because whether that leader is intentionally developing that culture of safety or accidentally, they're developing a culture one way or another. And we've really talked a lot about, are you intentional or are you accidental? And what are you trying to show your teams? If you show up in the morning and you don't have your safety boots on and your vest on, what culture are you saying to your teams? We've learned the right conditions must exist. The right conditions have to be in place for any change, but for leader standard work, that is also the case. If I have leadership transitions going on, maybe leaders being bumped up in leadership levels or new leaders being brought in, the right conditions need to be in place, meaning I shouldn't just operate on, I've got a calendar, I'm putting leader standard work in here at this business without asking myself the question first, is that business ready? And is that leader ready for that challenge? We've learned in very obvious ways sometimes, in very subtle ways others, that the teams respond faster than their leaders sometimes when you begin to put activities in place and make it a regular habit. And the one example I had was one of our businesses in Florida. They were trying the huddle idea out. They had tried it for a week. It was the second week of huddles. And one of the leaders had been caught in traffic behind an accident that morning and was late for the morning huddle. But you know where his team was? His team was in their designated space waiting to have the huddle. And when their leader didn't show up, they started to have the huddle by themselves. Each of the crew leaders were talking about, where are you going today? And do you need any help? Leaders respond fast. Team members respond fast when leaders begin to introduce behaviors that make a difference. And the huddle was one example for me. It does take reps. It takes reps to build new behaviors. And we've really started thinking about our own approach to how we train and develop here, and particularly around leader standard work. And we have spent a lot of time sharing information. Why? The key activities we'd like you to do, how to do them. And we spend a little bit of time trying to turn that information into knowledge, meaning that they could connect the activity or the information that they were hearing to go, okay, I think I can understand how that might affect me and my business. But without the time and the energy and sometimes perhaps the patience or the design, we haven't given them enough time to experience the impact of it. In those 3 pilot locations where you spent 8 to 10 weeks, we certainly saw that happen. But unless somebody has the time to go hear the information, develop some knowledge, and then spend time working on the experience of that new knowledge, they're not going to get the full effect. It takes reps to get this going. It definitely takes patience and humility. I've been humbled throughout this experience myself, both on my side and maybe my own shortcomings in how we've approached this at times. but also our leaders have experienced that too. They've experienced the frustration that comes with, God, I tried, but I couldn't make it happen. Fallbacks will occur. We need to be ready for that. We need to say, it's okay. It is a practice. It's a practice like any other practice, and be ready for that. And the last thing, I frankly, I had 5 things on this board until just 2 days ago. When I said, getting ready for this conversation for me was my own reflection on how we've done. And I certainly have learned that I need more focus going into 2025. I need more focus on how I bring this to our teams. I need more focus on how I exercise these same behaviors so that it's felt by those leaders and recognized by those leaders, and how I help. I may have talked longer than 25 minutes, Mark, but maybe we should take some questions.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. Well, don't worry about it, Brent. You had a lot of great things to share, and we have some questions that came in. So I'll encourage people to continue submitting those, and we'll give Brent a bit of a break, do a couple of announcements real quick before the Q&A. So next slide, please. As Brent mentioned, he and I are both instructors as part of Karen Martin's TKMG Academy. So I want to thank Karen for providing a special offer to people attending the webinar. You can save 20% off anything that they offer using code KN for KaiNexus, KNTKMG20. This code will be valid through December 10th. You can access individual courses like Brent's course on leader standard work, my course on mistake proofing. They offer annual subscriptions and coaching and prepaid licenses. So check that out. You can learn more at tkmgacademy.com. I want to tell you about our next webinar, our final webinar for the year. It's going to be presented on December 10th by Jarvis Gray. He is the author of a new book called Mastering Healthcare Excellence. I would encourage people, if you don't work in healthcare, I think there's a lot to learn from Jarvis. So if you want to think about this as just mastering excellence or mastering organizational excellence, please do join us December 10th. You'll receive an email about the webinar, or you can sign up to be notified of future webinars. If you're watching this recording on YouTube, for example, go to kainexus.com/webinars, and we'll look forward to a great series again in 2025. Next, I want to mention our blog. There's a lot of great content published there every week. You can find it at blog.kainexus.com. And we also have a podcast, the KaiNexus Continuous Improvement Podcast. You can find it at kainexus.com/podcast. You can find it Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you find podcasts. The audio of today's session will be there in the podcast feed if you want to revisit it when you're driving to work someday. It's going to be there. We encourage you to follow and subscribe the podcast. And then final announcement, as you leave, you'll have a prompt to fill out a feedback survey. I know sometimes we get surveyed to death, but we do read through the survey responses. So we encourage you, please do, when you can, take a couple of minutes afterwards or later this afternoon to fill out the feedback. There are questions that are very helpful to us, not just feedback on the session today, but your ideas about topics for future webinars. We really do value that feedback. Okay, so if you can advance it, you can see Brent's contact information, and we will jump into questions. Question from Chad. Maybe we'll start here. He's curious if you deployed leader standard work to the 16 branches concurrently, or if you did it one at a time, where you deployed, learned, and iterated.
Yeah, fantastic question. So there are some key things, particularly on the huddles, that we deployed to the 2 pilot locations that we actually did that at, and a 3rd location that we went to. That being said, when it comes to some other leader standard work practices, like the use of daily dashboards to manage performance, we've been introducing that to all of the managers at the same time. Again, I think that you get a little bit of inconsistency there in the use of those things, because just distributing information via Zoom doesn't always get the behavior. It's the information transfer, if you will, perhaps a little bit of the knowledge, but when it comes to the experience level, I have found that just happens so much more when you are in a room together, or can do that in a functional way. So not to everybody all at once. Yeah.
Thank you. We've got a question from William. What was the process to define the primary responsibilities and activities? Was this done through brainstorming with the leadership team?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So we do have the benefit at Sperber level of having a whole lot of folks that have been in the landscaping business for a long time and have been part of other landscape companies in the past. But we went through a process of engaging both formally and informally leaders across our organization, not only at the Sperber level, but then as we started to frame things up, we would take it to the business leaders that are those individual companies out there and ask for their feedback and input along the way.
Okay, thanks. Another question from William is a follow-up. He's asking you could you please repeat the 4 steps to develop and manage relationships? Because that wasn't on the slide. He got connect with ops, survey the job, but missed the last ones.
Yeah, so it's very kind of a landscape specific sort of approach, right? There where we have suggested if you go out to the field to observe work and are on a customer's job site, that there are 4 great things that can help any leader of our business. That is to engage the operations team, not only observe the work that they're doing, but also check in on them, perhaps have a lunch with them if they're hitting their lunch break. Are they on track for their daily work or not? Meaning, are they going to finish the jobs they have assigned? Second piece would be to see the job itself and prepare as an account manager to know what's going well on this job site versus know what's going not well. And I want to know that before I engage with my client, which was step number 3. So engage with my client and be able to say, hey, I'm literally on your job and I'm learning some things. Here's what I see. Here's what the crews are working on. What can we do for you next week when we come back here again? And then the 4th thing was add value to the job site. Our leaders, their biggest struggle in observation is that landscaping is very distractionary. When we get to our job sites, we tend to want to pick up branches and pull weeds ourselves rather than just observe the work. But somebody needs to pick up the branch and pull the weed. And so we encourage our managers to do that work along the way as well.
Okay. Got a question from Mark, who, what do you think about differences between manufacturing and R&D? Do you think your learnings are equally valid in both areas?
To be truthful, I've not spent a whole lot of time on the R&D side. On the manufacturing side, it was not at Toyota, right? I was on the distribution side of their house at Toyota, but the things I learned in that fast-paced manufacturing company called GAF making shingles, definitely sort of all applies. I think I've spent less time in R&D, and so wouldn't be prepared to answer much about that side of it.
Okay. But I think that general point about these concepts being applicable in so many different areas, there might be some needs to make adjustments based on the environment. But I know people who have very effective leader standard work in healthcare organizations, and I think it's kind of that challenge of go try it out and see what you need to adjust, if anything.
That's exactly right, Mark, and I agree. I think that I started those 6 responsibilities, and I look at a leader. I worked with a nursery. I've worked, Karen and I did a little bit of work with a government agency, and I was thinking about the leaders that they had there in an application licensing department, and I'm going, do those 6 key responsibilities hold true no matter what the leader is? And I kind of go, yeah, they kind of do. And then I started thinking about the activities, and yes, to your point, my approach may change a little bit based on the nature of the work, but I think it holds true.
Mm-hmm. One question I wanted to ask, so I'm going to ask it as host. When you talk about reflection, I love that quote about how the learning comes from the reflection. Do you have any, sort of thoughts on like a framework or a specific that something that might guide our reflection rather than saying, okay, I'm going to sit and reflect? Is there kind of a framework or some questions that we can ask to reflect?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I don't know that I've ever sat down and thought through that really methodically. Although I would say that my own practice over the years has evolved. And at one, as I've gotten better at planning and creating a plan for something that's going to happen, I certainly am thinking back to what was the plan. I do this individually, a colleague and I, when we run a training Zoom, for example, we may do 4 different Zooms throughout the day, the exact same Zoom. And after every Zoom, we're reflecting, going, how did that go? What can we do
Hmm.
better next time? And we are
Hmm.
tweaking and improving the deck. So I think it really depends. If I'm thinking about my week, I spend time thinking about what did I have planned to get done this week, and what did I not get
Hmm.
accomplished, and what things should I have planned on but didn't, meaning I didn't anticipate them well enough. If I'm thinking about, the month or the quarter, as my team starts to think about 2025, we are thinking about where do we come from, and good Lord, it didn't look anything like we thought it would at the beginning of 2024.
Hmm.
But we're trying to figure out how that applies to 2025. So I just maybe organically have taken a couple different approaches.
Yeah. And that question of what went well, what could have gone better. Those are two of the questions we ask people in the survey about the webinar. But I think of, kind of one thing I'll suggest is I think in parallels to things I've learned from Toyota people about problem solving, I think similar questions can be helpful. What did we expect to happen? What actually happened? Is there a gap? And then try to think through, well, why was there a gap? And sometimes that gap is that we exceeded expectations. Why was that?
Yeah,
Is there something that we need to make sure we repeat? So, I think that, or, PDCA, just kind of checking what we did and asking what adjustments, if any, would we make? That's one way I try to reflect.
I like that.
So, question here from Beta: how can you ensure that branches will follow your plans when they've been doing it their own way for many years? Have you run across resistance or challenges?
Definitely. We've run across challenges with, I wouldn't say it's resistance, right? To me, it is all change.
Hmm.
And change, as we all know, can be scary. It can be scary because of my own fear of not knowing a different way, or going, look, I've been successful for 30, 40 years doing it my way. Why do I need to adjust? And so all of those things, I'm in a much better place myself than I probably was thinking about that 20 years ago, where I probably had much less patience for that type of expectation, or I had much less empathy, perhaps, in my approaches. But I've come to expect that, and really, really work hard on first understanding their perspective and how they've done things, because there's definitely things that we have learned from all of the companies in the Sperber family, best practices that exist out there, no doubt about it, and we embrace those and share those across the organization. But if we are trying to put something new into place that perhaps a team has never done before, we have a lot of sort of empathy towards understanding, what do they do now? How do they do it? And how could this be transitional for that? And
Mm.
and work through that with them.
Okay. Thank you, Brent. Let's see. William asked, let's see, have you seen improvements to safety, quality, and performance due to the introduction of the standardized huddles?
Yeah, safety, I think, has been broad, and maybe not so much on the huddle standpoint, although huddles are a great place to reinforce the safety culture that is expected, and ensure through those huddles that the teams have the right supplies, PPE, things of that nature. But I think the bulk of our safety effort has been a combination of the expectation around creating those start a day and end a day practices with the stretch and flex as our trucks leave out in the yard, putting in place a gate check where we have leaders checking to make sure equipment is tied down, tires are properly inflated, etc. We also have, I would call it a 30-minute safety huddle for the entire organization. We have 170, 180 people jump on a call every Tuesday. And that constant reminder that safety is important and taking time out for that, and sharing accidents or near misses or incidents that happen across the board certainly affect or help others avoid those in the future. So definitely on the safety side. On the huddles, I think the quality of conversation and the relationships have stepped up, meaning the leaders are more engaging with their teams rather than just quickly going, hey, you got everything you need? They're actually having a conversation, starting to ask better questions and provide better support, and starting to learn how good of problem solvers their team leads are. So I think from a quality standpoint, that has come up. And starting on the efficiency side, I think it's a starting point. Maybe we haven't seen it quite yet, but starting to get an expectation of, hey, you are going to 4 jobs today. You're supposed to be at each one of them for an hour and a half or 2 hours. And are we hitting those marks, and are we accomplishing the work the client expects? I think we're starting to get some focus on that too.
Yeah. And maybe following up on that question of how do you ensure that different teams or branches across 14 states are following standards, are there lessons learned about, I mean, it's probably difficult to go and see. I don't know how often senior leaders that oversee, such a broad region, do they go and see? Is that more based on local leaders within their state or area?
Yeah, good question. And I'm sorry I didn't answer that one before. Multiple ways we try. Certainly, we have challenges with it because the amount of time to follow up. But at the Sperber level, if the safety leader that we have, our director of safety or regional director of safety, are going, they not only are looking for safety things, they're going, hey, I thought you guys were doing huddles, and they know the purpose of the huddle and should that be put in place. They know some of the other expectations we have around checking our dashboard. So that in all of our executive team, as we travel, everybody is in tune around what those expectations are and can help follow up on that. Beyond that, I would say that we get some sort of check-in on that when we have weekly calls, whether it be a sales call or a labor management call or something like that. It's not just asking, how are you doing? It's, please bring up your dashboard. Talk us through what you're seeing in the dashboard. Talk us through those jobs that may be in jeopardy of some kind, and having them practice it live with you on the Zoom. You get a quick sense whether or not they've opened that in the last 5 weeks or not, really, really quickly when you make them do it.
Yeah. Okay, well, we've got a couple minutes left. Maybe, Brent, if you can pop that slide up once more with the screen share. There's a lot of thank yous in the chat. People sometimes have to pop off a couple minutes early because of their schedules. But I want to thank everybody for attending today. Dave says, great session. Thank you. And again, as a reminder, everybody, please do take a couple of minutes if you can with that survey. I want to invite you to check out we have more than 100 previous webinars in our on-demand library. You can find that at kainexus.com/webinars. There's a big old button in the sidebar. You can also find our webinars on YouTube and our YouTube channel. So we've got Scott saying, enjoyed it as always. Thanks, Brent. Thank you from Karen. A thank you from Laura Hall, and outstanding session, Thomas said. So again, a final reminder, I want to thank Karen Martin and TKMG Academy for their special offer. You can save 20% on anything in their great education library using the code KNTKMG20. KNTKMG20. That'll be valid through December 10th. So Brent, thank you. Is there any kind of final thought or even just a farewell from you?
Oh, one, just again, thank you. Thank you for the time, Mark, and the opportunity to do this. It's been a wonderful learning experience for me to put myself through the own reflection on this, and is already helping to start to shape my 2025. And I certainly appreciate the questions, the attendance we had. Leaders at all levels, we need to constantly learn, and I'm so happy we're doing so.
Yeah, well, thank you again for accepting the invitation to come and do this session. Great job, Brent. And thank you, everybody, for attending live, or thank you for watching the recording or listening to it. So again, I hope we'll see you all on December 10th, Jarvis Gray, author of the book, Mastering Healthcare Excellence. So thanks again.
Bye, everybody.